Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk today, and thanks especially to the organisers for rearranging things so I could have a video link up. I'm sorry I can't attend in person. I was really looking forward to it, the conference, and also some Queensland sunshine, winter sun. Um, anyway, yeah. So I'm going to talk today about some of the research we've been doing on biocontrol for Queensland fruit fly. And just before I go into that, just to give you an idea of the context of some of the research, fruit fly research that we have been doing at Agriculture Victoria Research recently, in addition to the biocontrol and biopesticides. So we've been working on mass trapping for a number of years, and we've developed a new lure that targets mated female flies, and that's showing good effectiveness in field trials. We've done some research on detection, looking in berries at different identification keys at different stages of following a sting by a fruit fly and looking at preferences and larval survival in fruits. We've been developing LAMP as a diagnostic tool, and Bronwyn, who's speaking next, I believe, has championed that for us and has been using it out in the field. And the idea is this piece of technology about the size of a shoebox can give a rapid and accurate diagnostic of insects. And we've tailored this for Queensland fruit fly and a number of other flies, including swallowing Drosophila. And it can give a result in about 40 minutes, an accurate molecular result. We've done some post-harvest work looking at flotation trials and how LAMP could be used to sort of quickly analyze all of the floating material that might include larvae. And also some work developing surveillance for spotted wing Drosophila, which we see as a huge potential threat. And I'm sure the berry industry know all about it, and how we can effectively and very quickly analyze trap samples to look for spotted wing Drosophila as a surveillance practice. So that's kind of how everything fits together. And today I'm going to talk about the biocontrol and biopesticides research. So this was a 2-year research program that is really just finishing up now, that was funded through Hort Innovation from levy funds of 8 different fruit and veg industries, including the berry industry, and also through the Department of Ag. And it was co-invested and collaboration between Agriculture Victoria, Queensland University of Technology, QDAF, and Western Sydney University. And the main aim of this program, it was really, there's very little biocontrol work being done in Queensland fruit fly, and it's really seen as a real core element of integrated pest management. And the idea was really to spend 2 years really getting proof of concept for what this biocontrol program could look like. 2 years is not enough time to do all the research, obviously, for it, but it was really to get going, really kickstart the research. And I hope you'll see from this that it was very successful in what we managed to do, especially considering the restrictions that we faced over the last 2 years, and yeah, particularly down in Victoria. So there were 2 main components to this program. There was one to look at biocontrol using parasitoids, which are natural enemies of fruit fly, and the other was to develop proof of concept for the potential use of biopesticides for controlling, for managing fruit fly in a sort of sustainable way, an alternative to using chemicals. There's a lot of components to this project. I'm going to focus in on a few of them, and there's really sort of an overview of what they are there. Yes, so starting with the parasitoid program. So in Australia, there are 2 key natural enemies of fruit flies, and they are parasitoid wasps. And the 2 species that we focused on in these 2 species, we focused on them in our research. They only attack tephritid fruit flies, so the family that the fruit flies belong to. And one species is called Phopis araceanus, and that was introduced about 70 years ago as a biocontrol agent, and has proliferated, particularly in Queensland and northern New South Wales, where it can affect quite a bit of control on the fruit fly populations. The other parasitoid is a native insect, and a native parasitoid is specific to different fruit flies, native to Queensland. Both these parasitoids really are very prevalent in Queensland and northern New South Wales, but Diachasmorpha kraussei has a much more extended range. The native insect does, from the Northern Territory down to New South Wales. And as we found out in this program by doing an extensive survey across the state at the beginning of the project, that there are signs of this parasitoid now appearing in the top northeast corner of Victoria, very small populations, but it seems to be getting down here. Now, just a little overview of a parasitoid life cycle in this schematic. So there's our fruit fly in the top left-hand corner coming in and stinging an apple. And the parasitoid is equipped with an extremely powerful sense of smell that can hone in on the particular odors that are given off by infested fruits and the infested by fruit flies. And so it's basically your insect sniffer dog, and it can hunt out and find infested fruits. And then when it finds an infested fruit, it crawls about on the surface, and then it injects its egg into either the egg or the larvae of the Queensland fruit fly. Now, the Phopis aracanus, the first insect parasitoid I mentioned, that one injects its egg into the eggs of Qfly, and kraussei goes for the larvae of the fruit fly. And it has a much longer egg-laying device, which sort of fishes around in the fruit till it can find a larvae. And then once they've injected their egg into the Queensland fruit fly, the larvae of the Queensland fruit fly continues to develop until it reaches the pupal stage. And just before it reaches the pupal stage, the parasitoid larvae, which is just sitting there as a tiny first instar larvae, then begins to devour the Queensland fruit fly, and out of the pupae pops an adult parasitoid rather than a fruit fly. So that's how it works. So the parasitoids are not killing the eggs and larvae. Essentially, they go on to develop, and they kill them just as they reach that pupal stage. So, as I mentioned before, these parasitoids were thought to be absent in Victoria at the beginning of the program. There's a little bit of a sign that, as I say, we found that one of them, kraussei, has begun to reach Victoria. What we really want to look at is, so the question, obviously, fruit flies have been increasing their distribution over the last decade. They've really begun, the populations are really growing in Victoria. And so it's what we call enemy-free space, that the Queensland fruit fly is increasing in numbers. The populations have been growing without their key predators present. So we want to sort of inject those predators and get them established. And so we want to look at a program of mass releasing. What if we reared up and mass released these parasitoids in Victoria? And in this 2-year program, we really want to ask some really basic questions. That is, one, will they do anything? Can they survive at all in the Victorian climate? Secondly, let's say they can, will they then reproduce? And will they show any establishment through the season? Obviously, a really key question is, will they survive from one season to the next? But the limits to the program we haven't been able to look at that just yet, but we hope to. And really the key question here is, can we fast track their establishment and bolster the populations by mass releasing these parasitoids? There are further questions in terms of, could we mass release them and release them on farm, and look at whether we could have localized management using parasitoids as a biocontrol strategy, but again, further than this program. So real basic fundamental questions about biocontrol. So in the mass rearing program, we were collaborating with QUT, Tony Clark's team at QUT. Tony's team went out and collected the parasitoids from a number of different crops and also non-crop hosts. That's wild tobacco, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and reared out the wasps and got them into culture. And then they were shipped down through lockdown to our mass rearing center at our Tatura Smart Farm. And there we sort of further developed the mass rearing technique so we could get large numbers of the wasps ready for release. And the releases then took place across Victoria. And this mass release work was led by Dr. Lucy McClay. And Lucy did a number of releases with a focus on urban areas. We did 10 release sites in urban areas and 3 orchard sites. And in the first year, these releases were focused on Phobos aracenus, and we released 35,000 insects and around about 6,000 per release. And then in this last season just gone by, we released more aracenus and also Qfly, the native species, as well. And then after following the releases, Lucy did some observations around the sites of releases, and then at a subset of those release sites collected fruits on a regular basis and reared them through to look at if the parasitoids were showing what sort of evidence we could get that parasitoids were establishing within season. And we've just finished doing a lot of the collections and the rear outs, and the results are sort of data is being collated and analyzed at the moment. But here's a sort of a sneak preview. That's the rearing, some of the rear outs we've got of that photograph there. So Phobos aracenus showed good signs of establishment at the release sites. It established about 2 out of 5 of the release sites, where we monitored it over a long period. And the establishment was seen up to 11 weeks after release. And that was just as far as we'd got when we were looking at the data. That top graph on the left, in the middle there, shows that we saw that's looking at the number of parasitoids emerging from fruit that's collected, and you can see it got right up to about 30%. Then it dropped right down. Now that is a good indication that what has happened is that those original released parasitoids, those adults, die off, and then you start seeing them grow as the next population starts to emerge. It hit winter at that point in the season, so it remained quite low as we went into winter. The table at the bottom is some of the data we've collected so far on Qfly this year from the releases. Now that showed really good evidence of establishment at the sites. So at all sites we saw establishment of the insect. It seemed to be surviving. And in that table, really, to summarize, the 3 fruits at the top of the table, that was in a single garden where they were released. And what it's really showing is that the insects will move from tree to tree and start to parasitize as the fruit becomes nice and juicy and full of fruit flies. And we were seeing so good levels of parasitism there. And then in this down the road at a site at 200 meters from the release site, again, when the fruits were present, we were seeing nice signs of parasitism. So these insects were dispersing. And we also did some collections at a site which was 1.5 kilometers away, and these releases were in Mildura, and we found evidence for parasitoids there. So there's definitely good evidence that Qfly can establish at least within the season. So right now, what we're doing is going on to do some overwintering trials, and so far the data is looking very promising that the insect can survive over the chilly Melbourne winter. Now, in terms of the off-target effects, so these are established parasitoids that have been one for all time, the other in the last 70 years for established in Queensland and down the coast. But we wanted to ask a specific question, and since this insect is specific to frittids, would it attack the gall thistlefly, which was a biocontrol agent released about 30 years ago for the control of spear thistles? And although there wasn't a lot of evidence that it would, we just wanted to do some duty of care to look at either species showed any ability to parasitize this fly. So the fly lays its eggs into the thistle buds, where the larvae start to develop and then sort of kill off the thistle bud. And we did a series of behavioral trials looking at everything from whether the insect shows any interest, any foraging behavior on thistles, any signs of parasitism, whether there was any difference in when the parasitoid was around and the fly was around, any difference in the number of thistlefly larvae that would come out of the thistles, and there was nothing, basically. So we couldn't find any behavioral or any other evidence and we dissected dead larvae inside the thistles, no evidence of parasitism. So, so a good indication that there's no off-target effects on this fly from either parasitoid species. So some other work in the project was Tony Clark was looking at conservation biocontrol. So where the parasitoids are already present, how can we bolster the populations of parasitoids? And there was really three areas he looked at. There was looking at wild tobacco. Now this is an interesting one because wild tobacco is a weed itself, but it also hosts a tephritid fruit fly that's a non-pest called the wild tobacco fly. And the parasitoids can attack this wild tobacco fly and can lead to quite a large numbers of parasitoid emergence. So Tony's team did some work looking at more closely at this parasitoid in the life cycle around the year and showed that the wild tobacco supports the parasitoids right the way through the year and is very productive in that early sort of spring season, sort of or in spring, in October, November. So it's a good source for parasitoids, and it's a bit of a playoff, obviously, as a status as a weed, but really interesting data in terms of the parasitoid ecology. They also looked at augmentoria, and these are basically bins, buckets, containers that have a mesh over the top. You put your infested fruits into the container. The Queensland fruit fly get trapped as they emerge, the adults, and the parasitoids can escape through the mesh, through the holes in the mesh. And this is so this is a sort of combination between orchard hygiene, improved orchard hygiene, and then and enhancing the biocontrol as well. So really nice and simple, and something that we sort of see as being very useful in a kind of a community approach to managing fruit fly, particularly in urban areas. Tony's team also looked at floral resources and what could we provide to help the parasitoid survival, and he looked at whether they fed on different flowers, and they looked at a number of different native and other established floral species, and didn't find any evidence for the survival on these flower species. And also looked at whether the parasitoids might be feeding on fruit juice, and couldn't find any evidence for that either. So there may be other species that we're not we need to consider, or it may be that the parasitoids are using something else as their sugar source. So really interesting findings, and really a step towards that conservation biocontrol. And just to sort of touch on the biopesticide work, because obviously it's a large area, but to give you an indication. So these biopesticides, these are formulations of naturally occurring microbes which kill off insects. And so entomopathogenic insect killing, nematodes and fungi were the two areas that looked at in this program. And the idea was to identify and isolate Australian species, to screen them for their effectiveness against Queensland fruit fly, to look at formulation and evaluate how effective they might be as biopesticides. The work on entomopathogenic nematodes was led by Marcus Rieger and his team in Citaram, and this built on some work that they've been doing previously through Citaram's PhD, and made some really nice they've made some lovely findings in this work, and they got a number of Australian isolates of the entomopathogenic nematodes. They screened them for the virulence and various different indicators of their effectiveness. And they found high levels of mortality against larvae and pupae. They've selected the sort of 12 best performing strains, and they're going on to do further tests, looking at adults and also semi-field trials. With the fungi, we were starting a little bit behind that because there wasn't really any work in Australia on that. There's work overseas on medfly and other tephridids. And we went out, and this is led by Amy McKinnon in our team, and PhD student Medita Lauer. And they have screened a number of entomopathogenic fungal isolates from QDAF. So collecting Queensland tested on other insects, and also went out and collected new isolates from Victorian soil, isolated and cultured them up. And we've got some really promising results from that as well, some good evidence of high effectiveness against larval and potentially pupal strains of stages of Queensland fruit fly. So again, this research is really showing promise. It's really got a good start now, and we're sort of developing an Australian basis for the biopesticide research. So, sort of summarizing, I mean, the biocontrol work we saw as particularly the parasitoid work, particularly important around urban areas. There's a lot of worry that urban and regional towns in Victoria are sources of fruit fly, which then sort of move out to the growing regions. So we think that that's why we focused on the releases there. But biocontrol fits in a sort of strategy of targeting the fruit flies at every different life stage. So at the moment, a lot of the focus on fruit fly management is on the adult flies, so bait spraying or mass trapping, or and potentially sterile insects. Some of those insects are always going to get through. Some of those reproductive females will get through into the orchards or the crops, and the parasitoids then, if we can establish and keep those populations high, they'll mop up those egg and larval stages. There's still going to be some that get through. And the biopesticides, really our aim there is, can we use them to treat the orchard soils, really stop those, especially after sort of harvest time, when there's fruit maybe left on the ground, or there's fruit fly populations that may start emerging as adults and survive over winter. Can we really knock down those populations as well, those life stages as well? So it's really a holistic way to managing fruit fly, which is the way we sort of we see it evolving. And really, just to finish again, it's for me the focus. We really need to keep focusing on this use of numbers of tools and really not look at we've moved away from that sort of silver bullet approach. And each of these different tools work together in a way to stop the insect or kill the insect in a different life stage or a different time of year. And so it's still a very, very important research question is how well do these tools work, and how can they work best together? And it's very different between the different crops. Obviously, whether we're looking at berries, or we're looking at stone fruit, or we're looking at table grapes, we've really got to work with the industry to look at the context, look at their pest management programs for all other insects as well, and look at how the fruit fly toolkit fits in there. I think this is a really important area of research that is difficult, and it's hard to focus. We tend to focus on developing the tools, but this integration, it's a collaboration between the research, the communication, the adoption, and working with the growers. And I think this is where our research is at, and this is where we need more research to develop these strategies. So I think I've said enough.
Yeah,
thank you to the team. Hopefully I did it within the time limit, or went over.
Thank you very much for that. You have sold us quite well at the end, and it's really good to see that there's some natural solutions, and maybe next time we have our Qfly outbreak in WA, we can use some of those flies over there as well. So thank you very much for that. I'll give you a round of applause. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for questions, but you've all got Paul's details and you know where he lives. So I'm sure he'll be happy to take any questions if you'd like to contact him, at his workplace. Thank you again, Paul.
Thank you. Have a lovely conference.
Thank you.